Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is pretty straightforward. We take a stack of sources, in this case a really massive detailed biography, and we pull out the essential, often contradictory and frankly shocking stuff you need to know to understand a cultural giant.
And today, we are decoding Andy Warhol, born Andrew Warhol Jr., and he's a figure who is, well, you could say he's indisputably the most important American artist of the second half of the 20th century.
That's a huge claim.
It is, but what defined his career wasn't just, painting. It was a deep exploration, almost a sociological experiment on the whole relationship between advertising, mass media, and our culture of celebrity.
And that's exactly what we're digging into. We want to look past the surface, the silver wig, the flat voice, the soup cans, to really get at the mechanism behind the mystique. How does a boy from a working-class immigrant family become what the art world now calls the bellwether of the art market?
Right.
He was the first to really synthesize this idea that being good in business was the most fascinating kind of art.
And that is absolutely the key. His whole transformation of everyday consumer goods, celebrity photos, into these instantly recognizable artworks, it fundamentally challenged and really collapsed the old boundaries between high and low culture.
And he did it through his embrace of mechanical reproduction.
Yeah, philosophical embrace, really. It wasn't just a tool for him.
So, okay, here's the first paradox we have to wrestle with. Warhol is famous for coining the phrase 15 minutes of fame, which implies something fleeting, right?
Yeah, totally ephemeral.
But if you actually look at his career, his market,
yeah,
he engineered everything, not for 15 minutes, but for this lasting, massive, and constantly appreciating influence.
Absolutely. I mean, look at his work now. It ranks among the most expensive art ever sold. That 2022 sale of shot sage blue Marilyn for $195 million.
Unbelievable.
It's the highest price ever paid at auction for a work by an American artist. And that tells you everything. The man who celebrated surface value achieved this immortal depth in the market. That's not luck. That is pure strategic genius.
Okay, let's unpack that journey. Because the Andy Warhol we think we know is a total invention. And it's built on a foundation that is surprisingly rigid and totally unexpected.
The working class foundation is just so critical to understanding the persona he eventually built. It's the contrast that makes the whole story so compelling. He was born Andrew Warhol Jr. in Pittsburgh, 1928.
His parents, Andrzej and Julia Warhol, were working-class Rusyn immigrants.
Right. For anyone who isn't familiar with that heritage, they came from a village called Miko, which was then in Austria-Hungary, but is now in modern-day Slovakia.
So Eastern European roots.
Deeply. The Rusyns, or Carpetho-Rusyns, have this very strong cultural identity. And his father, Andrzej, worked in a coal mine. I mean, you can't get a more foundational working-class job than that. And critically, the family was devoutly Ruthenian Catholic.
So you've got this very strict religious blue-collar upbringing. How does an environment like that, which sounds like the total opposite of the silver-painted decadence of the factory, even begin to shape an artist like him?
It shapes him through isolation. At 8 years old, he got a severe streptococcal infection, which led to this cascade of other illnesses: scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, and most importantly, Sydenham's chorea.
Which is often called St. Vitus's dance, right?
Exactly. It's a neurological condition. It causes these involuntary movements, and it basically confined him to his bed for long, essential periods of his childhood.
That sounds like such a crucial, formative experience for a creative kid. I mean, it removes you from school, from social pressures, and just puts you in a space where your internal life is all that matters.
It was absolutely a formative isolation. He spent all that downtime just developing his core artistic skills. He was drawing constantly, but he also started making these meticulous scrapbooks, just crammed with Hollywood magazines.
So the obsession with celebrity starts right there.
It does. He's obsessively cutting out comic book images his mother, Julia, would buy for him. This is the beginning of his obsession with celebrity, with reproduction, and with the beautiful manufactured surface of American pop culture.
And there's a really great anecdote about his father that kind of runs counter to the stereotype of the gruff immigrant dad who doesn't support the arts.
That's right. His father and his brothers, they saw his passion for photography growing, and they actually built him a darkroom in their basement.
Wow.
So this coal miner dad, focused on physical labor, provides the literal tools for Warhol's later obsession with mass media. It shows this real early support for his talent, even if they couldn't possibly have known where it would lead.
And then the real acceleration happens after high school.
Yeah.
He graduates from the Carnegie Institute of Technology in '49 with a BFA in pictorial design, and then makes the move that defines everything. New York City.
And he did not waste any time. He moved there in June of '49 and, almost instantly turned that education into commercial success. The sources say that on his second day in the city, he met with the art director of Glamour magazine.
His second day.
Second day. And he secured his first commission right then and there, drawing shoes for an ad.
And shoes became this huge thing for him in the 50s. It's a motif that connects him directly to high fashion, to commercial polish. And it was during this period, working for clients like Israel Miller Shoes and RCA Records, that he developed his first signature style, the blotted line technique.
Yes, and this is so fascinating because it's a direct precursor to pop art, but he developed it entirely for commercial work.
So how'd it work?
It was a very simple, kind of rudimentary form of printmaking. He would draw a basic image, apply ink to the paper, and then immediately blot the wet ink onto a new sheet, usually with tracing paper.
So why was that so revolutionary for him, even in just a commercial context?
Because it solved a few problems at once. First, it let him repeat the basic image over and over again, which is super efficient for an illustrator. But second, the blotting process itself meant you never got a perfect copy.
So it introduced imperfection.
Exactly. It created these subtle, unpredictable variations. The line would blur or get thinner. It gave the reproduced image the slightly hand-drawn, almost ghost-like quality, but it still felt mechanically generated. It was this ingenious, low-tech way of doing mechanical reproduction long before he ever touched a silkscreen.
He was literally engineering imperfection into the process of reproduction. That's a huge conceptual leap for a commercial artist. And this obsession with shoes and high-end goods led to that great anecdote about celebrity.
Right. As a hobby, he starts sketching these ornate shoes, but he'd embellish them with gold leaf and dedicate each one to a famous person. Truman Capote, Elvis Presley, you name it.
Did they sell?
They did. They were exhibited in 1957 and sold pretty well for $50 to $225 each. So he's already establishing a market for this mix of mass-produced glamour and celebrity worship.
Which brings us to a really key point of tension that set him apart. You know, a lot of artists who went from commercial to fine art, like the abstract expressionists, they tried to hide their commercial past. They saw it as a stain.
Warhol did the exact opposite. He absolutely embraced it. He printed and handed out these beautiful little books of his illustrations, like 25 Cats Named Sam and One Blue Pussy. His mother, Julia, even did the calligraphy.
So he was using his commercial work to get fine artwork?
Explicitly. He was actively marketing himself, building the Warhol brand through commercial means. And you can imagine that created enormous friction in the high art world of the late 1950s. They saw it as, capitulating to consumerism.
But for him, it was armor.
It was total armor. He established himself as a commercial powerhouse first. He legitimized his techniques, repetition, speed, mass appeal. And then in the early 60s, he just took that successful commercial machine and pointed it directly at the fine art world. It's a perfect, almost flawless bit of market maneuvering.
That conversion happens so dramatically around 1961. And the leap to fine art starts, fittingly, not in a gallery, but back in the commercial world.
Exactly. In April '61, his first pop paintings, images based on comics and ads, like Saturday's Popeye and Superman, they weren't in a gallery. They were in a window display at the Bonwit Teller department store.
He's literally using commercial space to debut his fine art.
And the move to his signature technique, silk screening, was prompted by an image that is itself a unit of commerce.
Money.
That's right. Drawing dollar bills was the turning point. It inspired him to find a faster, more industrial method than the blotted line. He learned how to silkscreen in the spring of '62 from a guy named Max Arthur Cohn.
And silk screening became the perfect technological mirror for his whole philosophy.
It was perfect. It allowed for reproduction, variation, speed, and most importantly, it gave him this element of mechanical anonymity. It took the artist's hand out of the equation.
How was it that much different from the blotted line philosophically?
Well, the blotted line was reproducible, sure, but it still needed his physical touch, the pen, the manual blotting. Silk screening allowed for a photographic image to be transferred directly onto the screen. He could take an existing image, a soup can label, a celebrity photo, and reproduce it infinitely, with assistance. It let him actually become a machine.
And with that new industrial tool, his most iconic images just explode onto the scene almost overnight.
Totally. In May of '62, his painting Big Campbell's Soup Can with Can Opener gets featured in Time magazine. And that starts his most sustained motif, taking this mundane, ubiquitous thing and forcing the art world to look at it.
Which leads directly to that huge moment later that year in LA, the debut of the Campbell soup cans at the Ferris Gallery.
Yes, July 1962. That exhibition just crystallized his whole confrontation with consumerism. There were 32 cans, each on its own canvas, looking almost identical, just like cans on a grocery shelf.
And his philosophy on this is summed up perfectly in that famous quote about Coca-Cola. It wasn't about celebrating the art connoisseur, it was about celebrating democratic sameness.
Let's hear that quote again, because it's really a manifesto for his whole career.
He said, "What's great about this country is that America started the tradition where the richest consumers buy essentially the same things as the poorest. You could be watching TV and see Coca-Cola, and you know that the president drinks Coca-Cola, Liz Taylor drinks Coca-Cola, and just think, you can drink Coca-Cola too. A Coke is a Coke, and no amount of money can get you a better Coke than the one the bum on the corner is drinking."
That is the whole idea of pop art in a nutshell. It just strips away all the snobbery. The beauty of the object is that everyone has access to it. But it's so fascinating that this democratic spirit immediately got this intense backlash from the establishment.
How bad was the reaction?
It was pretty bad. In December of '62, the Museum of Modern Art held this big symposium. And the critics there just attacked pop artists, especially Warhol, for capitulating to consumerism. They saw it as the death of serious art, a total betrayal of the intellectual struggle of abstract expressionism.
And that kind of rejection could have sent another artist into hiding, but Warhol just leans into the absurdity. He even forms an avant-garde noise band, the Druds, in '63.
The Druds are a perfect example of his ability to just exist in all these contradictory worlds at once. It was a short-lived band, but the members were from the minimal and proto-conceptual art scenes, like Larry Poons and Walter de Maria.
So he's being rejected by one part of the art world while being embraced by the avant-garde.
Exactly. And by '63, the sheer volume of his work demands a new headquarters. And so the Notorious Factory is born at 231 East 47th Street.
A place that became synonymous with New York counterculture.
It was so much more than a studio. It was a scene, a hub for artists, musicians, drag queens, a whole bohemian world. And the aesthetic was immediate and purposeful. A guy named Billy Name painted the whole studio silver and covered it in aluminum foil.
What was the idea behind the silver?
It's industrial glamour. It's reflective, synthetic, metallic like a machine or a food wrapper. It visually reinforced his whole move toward industrialized production, where he had assistants like Gerard Malanga helping crank out silkscreen multiples. The factory was a place where creativity was processed like it was on an assembly line.
And we see that clash between his art and political sensitivity so clearly in 1964 with the Commission for the World's Fair.
Oh, the 13 Most Wanted Men mural. It was based on police mugshots. It was hugely controversial, and government officials objected almost immediately.
And it was painted over before the fair even opened.
Gone. Which just proves that the everyday image, a mugshot in this case, when it's magnified and repeated by Warhol, still had this cultural shock value the establishment just wasn't ready for.
And he proved he could monetize that shock value at the pivotal American supermarket exhibition later in '64.
That show was designed to look exactly like a grocery store, but everything inside was art. It's just market performance art at its absolute finest.
So what did he do?
Well, he sold a painting of a soup can on canvas for $1,500. But at the same time, he also autographed real, actual Campbell's soup cans and sold them for $6.50 each.
Or 3 for $18, a bulk discount.
Exactly. He was directly quantifying the value of celebrity endorsement versus the value of fine art. He was showing everyone that the signature and the idea were the real products, whether the medium was a canvas or a literal can of soup.
So as we get into the mid-'60s, Warhol is just pushing the boundaries of what an artist is even supposed to be. After showing his Flowers series in Paris in '65, he announces he's retiring from painting to focus on film.
Which was a total shocker to the art world, but if you think about it, it makes perfect sense conceptually. If his art is all about reproduction and mechanical anonymity, what's more reproducible than film?
Right.
And his response to his dealer who suggested he paint cows is legendary. He didn't paint them on canvas. He produced cow wallpaper in 1966, which literally covered the walls of the Leo Castelli Gallery. He turned painting into environmental decoration.
He was incredibly prolific in this film phase, from '63 to '68, made over 600 films.
And they were just audacious in their simplicity. I mean, think about Sleep 6 Hours of the poet John Giorno just sleeping. Or Eat, which is Robert Indiana eating a mushroom for 45 minutes. They weren't about plot, they were about forcing you to confront the simple act of duration.
But the breakthrough film, the one that really translated his pop philosophy to cinema, was Chelsea Girls in 1966.
Chelsea Girls was so innovative. He projected two 16mm films at the same time, side by side, each with its own separate audio track.
So it was like his silkscreen multiples, but on screen.
Exactly. It visually evoked that same repetition and variation. And let's not forget the pure camp. He also made this unauthorized Batman Dracula in 1964. He just loved B culture.
And this film phase was also where he cemented the fame of his factory crew, his superstars. Edie Sedgwick, Nico, Viva, Candy Darling. He used the camera to elevate these marginal figures into real celebrities.
He was a curator of celebrity, and that extended to music. At the end of 1965, he starts managing the experimental rock group, the Velvet Underground.
Right, and he makes them the house band for his exploding plastic inevitable multimedia events.
He funded their debut album, The Velvet Underground and Nico, provided that iconic banana album art. But the sources are clear, his actual production role was pretty minimal.
So what did he actually do?
He was a conceptual umbrella. Producer basically meant he paid for the studio time. But his brand, his association, was the most valuable part of the production. He gave them the instant credibility of the counterculture's most famous artist.
But that whole era of kind of carefree experimentation comes to a violent end on June 3rd, 1968. This is the ultimate turning point.
It was a brutal act that changed his life and his art forever. A radical feminist writer named Valerie Solanas, who was a marginal figure at the factory, walked into the studio and shot him.
She also shot the art critic Mario Amaya.
Yes. Solanas claimed Warhol had too much control over my life. She was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, but the consequences for Warhol were just profound.
He was so seriously wounded.
He was in the hospital for almost 2 months. And because of the internal damage, he had to wear a surgical corset for the rest of his life. The physical and psychological toll was just enormous.
And that trauma directly led to this major shift. The factory becomes much less chaotic, much more regulated.
Yes, Paul Morrissey takes over film direction, and he steers the Warhol brand toward more commercially accessible B-movies like Flesh and Trash. The whole vibe changes. Collaborators said it transformed into a regular office.
A business enterprise?
A necessary adaptation after the danger of the 60s. And for his own art, the shooting triggered this shift toward instant documentation. He started using a Polaroid camera to document his recuperation. He started carrying one everywhere, just chronicling his daily life.
And those Polaroids became the foundation for his entire portrait business in the 70s.
They were the raw material.
Yeah.
Exactly. And on a personal level, the trauma led to his most enduring romantic relationship. An assistant named Jed Johnson visited him every day in the hospital, and he moved in with Warhol to help nurse him back to health.
So the 1970s, this marks the era of what's called business art. These were quieter, more entrepreneurial years. Art critic Robert Hughes called him the white mole of Union Square.
That name captures the shift perfectly. He's moving away from the silver-painted spectacle and into the quiet, calculating efficiency of an office. And Warhol embraced this publicly.
He said it outright, didn't he?
He did. He said, "I went into business art. I wanted to be an art businessman or a business artist. Being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art." He didn't just accept commerce, he celebrated it and made it his subject.
And his main business model became the commissioned portrait.
It was highly standardized. He charged $25,000 for a single portrait, or he could get a deal, $40,000 for two. And he spent so much of his time just networking, finding new, rich patrons for these commissions, the Shah of Iran, Mick Jagger, Diana Ross.
And at the same time, he's expanding his media empire.
For sure. He co-founds Interview magazine in '69. It starts as a film journal, but he quickly revamps it to focus on celebrity and social life. It becomes a strategic vehicle for his business, a place where his featured subjects could display their social currency.
He also becomes a commercially published author, controlling his own narrative.
Yes. The Philosophy of Andy Warhol comes out in 1975, which really puts his detached persona down in print. Then Popism in 1980, where he's curating his own history. He even expanded into television, hosting shows like Andy Warhol's TV and the MTV series Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes.
Let's talk about the key art series from this era, because they were still really provocative. In '72, he creates the massive Mao series.
That series is a perfect example of turning political iconography into a commodity. He takes the universally recognized image of Mao Zedong and reproduces it in these garish pop colors. He's essentially converting a totalitarian symbol into a beautiful, mass-produced object. It's just brilliant in its irreverence.
And then on the total opposite end of the spectrum, you have the infamous oxidation paintings, the piss paintings.
These are so important because they show the factory's collaborative conceptualism.
Yeah.
The process involved priming canvases with copper paint, and then the abstract patterns were created by urinating on the canvas.
Sometimes by Warhol, but often by his assistant, Victor Hugo.
Right. And Warhol's reported comment is key. He joked that Victor Hugo's high vitamin B intake made the colors prettier. That just sums up the whole attitude, irreverent, detached, viewing the human body as just another chemical machine in the artistic process.
And yet he balances this outrageous conceptual work with these really prestigious commercial collaborations.
The BMW art car from 1979 is the prime example. He painted a BMW M1 racing car, and he insisted on painting directly on the car himself. The sources say he took only 23 minutes to paint the whole thing.
That's the perfect Warhol moment. Speed, spectacle, commerce, and performance all rolled into one.
He also used his art for philanthropy, which maybe connects back to his private faith. The Endangered Species series from '83 was made for the American Museum of Natural History, and he donated sets to wildlife organizations for fundraising.
But he was still always tracking the market. The Reigning Queen series from 1985.
That was entirely commercial. His own diaries show his apprehension. He noted the series was for the European market because he believed nobody here cares about royalty. He was constantly doing market analysis.
He gets this new jolt of creative energy in the 80s, though, from collaborations with younger artists, most famously Jean-Michel Basquiat.
That relationship was incredibly intense. They made over 50 large collaborative works. And while critics panned them at the time, Warhol privately thought some of them were masterpieces. It reaffirmed his commitment to collaboration.
And he was technologically progressive right to the end, embracing digital art.
Absolutely. In '85, he's making digital art on Amiga computers, doing a live TV demo with Debbie Harry. He loved any technology that enhanced that synthetic, reproducible quality. And his final major series brought his whole life full circle. The work's based on Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper.
Completed just before his death, it's the largest series of religious-themed works by an American artist. It brought his private Catholic faith right into his public high art world at the very end.
Which brings us to the most complex part of this whole story, the calculated mask. Warhol just perfected the art of the surface. He had the supremely impersonal public persona, often just giving these flat, non-committal answers like, no, and, yes.
So was that just shyness, or was it a calculated move? What was the purpose of this monosyllabic mask?
Oh, it was intentional, a sophisticated form of media control. He openly admitted he planted conflicting, often false stories about himself in the press just to trace how information spread. He always said everything you need to know is already there on the surface.
So the impersonal nature was a performance of detachment.
Precisely. His longtime partner, Jed Johnson, confirmed it. He said Warhol maintained a neutral expression at all times because showing any deep emotion, pleasure, or displeasure was, in Warhol's own word, corny.
Which makes his private, deep-seated faith all the more surprising. We're talking about a devout, practicing Ruthenian Catholic who went to Mass almost daily.
And this faith was active. He volunteered at homeless shelters. But his devotion was intensely private, almost hidden. The priest at his church noted that he always sat or knelt in the back pews.
Why so secretive about it?
Warhol gave a fascinating explanation. He said he was self-conscious about being seen crossing himself in the Orthodox way, right to left, in a Latin Catholic church. It was this cultural self-consciousness from his Rusyn background. His brother said he was really religious, but he didn't want people to know because it was private.
His sexuality is similarly full of ambiguity and contradiction.
It is. In the 50s, he submitted these beautiful homoerotic drawings to a gallery, but they were rejected for being too openly gay. And that rejection seems to have informed his strategy from then on.
He kind of weaponized the persona after that.
Exactly. He recalled being told he was too swish compared to more closeted artists like Jasper Johns, so he just embraced it, saying he used the persona of swish as armor. He enjoyed watching people's reactions.
But while his public persona was guarded, his films were exploring queer identity very openly.
They were, and yet the contradictions about his own sex life are just stark. In 1980, he famously claimed he was still a virgin. Some friends even agreed, calling his sex life abstract, more about watching than participating.
But there's evidence that contradicts that, right?
Yes. A hospital record from 1960 shows he was treated for a sexually transmitted disease. It seems the public presentation of asexuality was just central to his mystique, a way to maintain distance.
But despite all that, his private life did have these profound connections. The relationship with Jed Johnson was his most enduring.
It lasted 12 years. They reportedly functioned as husband and husband sharing a bed and a domestic life. It's this necessary counterpoint to the idea of the cold, asexual machine.
And the last piece of this puzzle, which ties right back to his immigrant roots, is his obsession with collecting and hoarding.
He was an almost pathologically obsessive collector, a pack rat. And this connects directly to what you might call peasant's wisdom, that ingrained fear of poverty. He hid his wealth, kept money in his mattress, even wore a diamond necklace hidden under his turtleneck because he didn't want people to know what he had.
And this manifested in the most literal way with his time capsules.
He created 610 of them. These were mostly just standard cardboard boxes, but each one had an average of 800 items. Letters, photos, his mother's things, even pizza boxes. It was more than hoarding. It was constant self-archiving.
Turning his entire life into a museum exhibit.
Exactly. And when his collection was finally auctioned after his death, the sheer volume was just astounding. It grossed over $25 million.
And it was everything, right? Cookie jars, watches.
175 cookie jars, 313 watches, antique furniture, and, crucially, art by people he admired. Liechtenstein, Basquiat. He collected his peers. But here is the final perfect twist that seals the persona. Jed Johnson confirmed that Warhol absolutely refused to hang his own art in his home. He said it was too corny.
Wow. He could see it as a product, a market force, but not something to live with. That's the ultimate detachment.
Given how methodical he was about everything, his death in 1987 has this chilling, tragic irony. It was the mechanical failure of the body that he tried so hard to deny, and it was entirely avoidable.
He'd been avoiding gallbladder surgery for 14 years because of this intense fear of hospitals. He was trying alternative remedies, a chiropractor, a nutritionist, who actually suggested he wear a small crystal.
By February of 87, the pain was just excruciating. He was admitted to New York Hospital and had the surgery. The surgeon later found his gallbladder was on the verge of perforating. The risk was already high because he'd waited so long, and yet he died the next morning, February 22nd, from a sudden cardiac arrhythmia.
The procedure was initially called routine, which seems impossible given his underlying conditions, especially the effects of the '68 shooting.
A later investigation told a very different story. The New York State Health Department actually cited New York Hospital for inadequate postoperative care.
What were the specific findings?
They cited a bunch of issues, not performing the right tests, a possible allergic reaction to antibiotics, and, critically, causing him to become severely overhydrated.
So that led to the wrongful death lawsuit from his family.
Right, alleging the arrhythmia was caused by improper care and water intoxication. The case was quickly settled out of court. The artist who tried to become a machine was ultimately killed by a failure of human systems and care.
And despite the tragedy of his death, his market influence just cemented his immortality. One art dealer described his market like a seesaw being pulled uphill.
That's a perfect analogy. Prices fluctuate, but each peak and valley happens at a substantially higher level than the last. He's the ultimate blue-chip investment.
We mentioned the Marilyn selling for $195 million, but his other major works are up there too. Silver Car Crash for over $100 million, 8 Elvises for $100 million.
His celebrity imagery, Marilyn, Elvis, Liz Taylor, it's become a permanent, institutionalized part of the global art market.
And the institutional legacy he planned in his will ensures that his philosophy continues.
His will established the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, dedicated to promoting innovative and challenging art. And the Andy Warhol Museum opened in Pittsburgh in '94, holding the world's largest collection of his work, including all 610 of those time capsules.
The ultimate archive of the man who obsessed over archiving himself.
And the final markers of his place in culture are global now. They renamed the 7th Street Bridge in Pittsburgh the Andy Warhol Bridge. A crater on Mercury is named Warhol.
And just recently, in 2024, the Slovak Republic, his parents' homeland, posthumously awarded him the Order of the White Double Cross. The working-class immigrant son is now a symbol of Slovakian pride.
So if we just synthesize this entire journey, from that sickly boy in a Pittsburgh basement to the silver-wigged mogul, Warhol's genius is in his complete and total penetration of American culture. He mastered celebrity, commerce, and mass production so thoroughly that, as one artist said, distinguishing Warhol from our everyday life is basically impossible now.
So you now have a full, complex picture. The sickly boy making Hollywood scrapbooks, the commercial illustrator who developed techniques of reproduction to speed things up, the pop artist who claimed to retire from painting, the victim of a shooting who transformed into a quiet, calculating business artist. He was the Catholic devotee obsessed with surface who turned commercial art into art worth hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
He once said with that perfect detached tone, "I'd like to be a machine, wouldn't you?" So, if you consider his dedication to the silkscreen, his use of assistants, his tape recorder that he called his wife, those meticulous time capsules, the ultimate question he leaves us with is this. Did Warhol achieve his goal, successfully converting his complex, contradictory self into a reproducible, immortal, and ultimately profitable brand long before his actual and tragically mundane death? It's something to think about the next time you see a copy of a soup can.